Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line, taking your calls. And let's see here. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. How are you?
I am good, Jill. Thank you.
On the lighter side, you spoke at our third annual Democracy Convention held at the University of Minnesota, and thank you for that. That was awesome. And I'm wondering what your take is on how what we're doing at our Democracy Convention, how it relates to the wars that are continuing and the fears that people have. And I don't want to take up time. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on what we're doing at our third annual Democracy Convention.
Well, I think, whether it be the Democracy Convention this past weekend in Minnesota, Netroots Nation this week in Atlanta, whenever we have these convening of people who are trying to help, on public policy, this is exactly how we will ultimately win, is with people power, right? We know that the public in general agrees with us on the issues. It's just that often money and things distort on the far right. But we have the people power, and right now people are engaged, and we saw the engagement both at the conference in Minnesota, and I think we'll see it again this week at Netroots Nation. The more we can get people reaching out to their elected officials, joining with organizations to amplify their voices, to fight the bad things that are happening at this time, and getting ready for the next set of elections, because now we all know elections have consequences without a doubt. Nothing more than looking at the last 24 hours and the madness that this president's put out there around North Korea and the really dangerous behavior says why we all have to be active. So every time we get together with other folks, I think it's energizing. It helps us share ideas and helps us to make sure that we can get other people also engaged, and that's ultimately how we win.
John in Janesville, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you both for what you do. Congressman Pocan, question, as far as the fairness doctrine goes, where we're getting killed and there's only 9 or 10 stations that talk about things that we want to do in this country today, when Ronald Reagan did away with that back in his tenure, was that a law or did he sign it out with executive privilege, executive order? You remember?
That's Tom. I think I might ask you that question.
Sure.
I'm not sure the history of it.
It was the Federal Communications Commission. The Fairness Doctrine said it was part of the FCC code. Part of the rules that the FCC promulgated in response to the Telecommunications Act. So it wasn't written by Congress. It was written by the FCC. So Reagan was able to direct the FCC to simply stop enforcing their own regulation. And then 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, President Obama ordered the FCC to actually physically remove it from the books. But it did not mandate that if I do a show on a particular network that Rush Limbaugh has to do the next show. It wasn't that. It was about speech by the station itself, which Sinclair Broadcasting does, that if you did an editorial on behalf of the station, you had to offer the other point of view, number one. Number two, you had to give a certain amount of free time to political candidates and talk about the issues of the day. And number three, you had to program in the public interest, which this all fell into that rubric. And the largest, 99%, 95% of that was providing actual news, which is why all the news networks lost money on their news feed, because that was the cost of keeping a radio or TV license.
And I think to John's point is, I think it would be great if we had the fairness doctrine back, right?
I agree.
Have that protection in place. And the second thing is, and I'm glad to see the Democrats made this part of their new better deal proposal about talking about better jobs and better wages and a better future, is antitrust law. Just the fact that we're watching Sinclair about to do a consolidation that's going to hit over 70% of the country, a company that's had a political bias to present media, that's a problem. And, it's part of our antitrust laws that quite honestly go back to Bill Clinton, but we see it in a number of areas. I'm glad to see the Democrats are raising issues like that, looking at 2018, because it really is affecting consumers and the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. David in Columbus, Ohio. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman. I appreciate your efforts in participating in this. The only chance I get to understand a true Democratic response to the Republicans is your comments, and since you sit in on all the meetings, unfortunately, the Democrats have seemed to go along with a lot of these wars, which are completely insane, and been carried on for a long, long time, all the way back to the Truman administration. What do you feel the Democratic response is? I know what Keith Ellison feels. I know what you feel. But what is the overall Democratic response to all this warmongering?
Well, I'll tell you, David, it's a great question, and I think, I've been looking. Let me, if I can, just read. I don't want to do it long. I'm going to read a sentence or two or a word or two out of Nancy Pelosi's statement. She called it recklessly belligerent, a grave lack of appreciation for the severity of the North Korean nuclear situation. I mean, I think if you follow, especially social media today, because we now have that in place, you can see I'm watching across the board, across somewhat the spectrum within the Democratic Party concern about what's happening, especially around North Korea. So while, I think one of the things we've always had to challenge, and you find it often with votes in Congress, is that people have a lot of the military operations in their district, and that sometimes affects how people vote on things. In general, especially with a president like this, I see more and more. That's why we had a almost unanimous vote on the Appropriations Committee to have a new reauthorization, because I think there's concern that we're not doing the checks and balances the Constitution says, which is getting Congress involved when that comes, because we're the closest to the people. So,
well, Paul Ryan blew that up, didn't he?
Well, he did, and I think this is where, I just put a tweet out today. We're trying to put pressure back on him again. I mean, Paul Ryan needs to start standing up for the country, and I would say political party, but I don't even think he's standing up for his political party right now. He's just rolling over and letting the president rub his belly whenever the president needs to, and that's quite honestly not the behavior of the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's supposed to be the Speaker for me and for the American people as well, because he's got that job, and instead he might as well go directly on the payroll of this White House with all the other wackiness they're doing, because he's defied any logic in standing up as a separate branch of government. So
I wonder,
we need him to stand up.
I wonder if he's thinking Trump is going to get impeached, Pence will become president, and I'll become vice president. So I need to be nice to these guys. Who knows?
The way he's going, he's just going to be a nice lapdog.
Terrell in Texas, you're on the air with. No, I'm sorry. I've got different call screening software here than normal. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're the one who's on the... No? Wait a second. Yeah, it's Norma. Okay. I'm having a hard time reading my own software. Norma, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Oh, no, it is Terrell. Hey, Terrell in Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good.
I appreciate y'all taking my call, Congressman Pocan and Mr. Hartmann. Well, my question is, I was a diehard Democrat. This year, right here, just basically made me want to go more independent, because what I'm wondering is, how come Congress and Democrats right now aren't really trying to force the issue of single-payer health care so that we can have some sort of basis to stand behind them? Most of the country is trying to become single-payer and everything, and I figure that if Democrats really force the issue, there'll be more Democrats elected for this next term.
Yeah, so Terrell, first of all, I agree. I mean, when I go around and do town halls, the number one issue that comes up is we talk about health care. The number one issue of any town hall these days, when we get to single payer or Medicare for all, gets the single best response. So I completely agree with you. But the only thing I'd say a little different is I do see Democrats talking about this, and we have a record number of sponsors on John Conyers' bill, Medicare for All, House Resolution 676, 116 people. So 116 people out of the 186 or so House Democrats are currently sponsors, the top level we've ever had. So I think that's encouraging and promising. But I also realize that with a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican President, it's not going to happen. So that does move us to 2018 and talking about that conversation. So I hear people like Randy Bryce, who's running against Paul Ryan in Wisconsin's 1st District, making this a major issue that he's talking about. And I'm seeing it in other congressional districts around the country. So the good news is 116 Democrats are in support of that bill, which is a record number. And the good thing is I think we're seeing people talk about it when they're running against Republican incumbents. So let's keep the pressure up. This is one where, I've said this, I don't like to quote bumper stickers, but if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. We just need to keep being vocal about this and asking for what we want as opposed to people telling us what we need in healthcare.
Amen. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
And, hey, Dr. Thom, is this me?
That's you?
Okay.
Finally. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I also, am for single payer, and I wish they'd at least put that in as an option in a bill. But no, the reason I call is this Trump TV thing is what I'm calling it. We already have perception management run by major corporations. You see the same thing on so many stations. And this reminds me of the brainwashing that was the basis of the book Fahrenheit 451. I don't think anybody reads anymore, and that's part of the problem. But if they don't understand that they are essentially being programmed that you'll think this way, you'll believe this way, taking away freedom of speech from us, taking away the First Amendment, it's going to be a lot easier. People are just going to go ahead and agree, and then when they try to pull this Constitution Convention stuff and deny us the right to elect senators or the right to protest or the right to vote, I don't know what is going to happen in this country because I don't think that people are going to put up with it. What makes these people think that they can turn us into 451?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. So what I look at is, they look at the last election, and not trying to re-debate the merits of it, but when we were down 200,000 Democratic voters in Wisconsin, it had consequences. Russ Feingold, who was, I think, one of the finest U.S. senators we had in the country, who during 2010 got kicked out like so many did across the country, was running again, wasn't down in a single poll. But because we had a depressed turnout, partially because of things like photo ID laws, partially because of a somewhat uninspired presidential campaign in Wisconsin with no visits by the candidate, we wound up losing, and Ron Johnson got reelected. And Tom, I don't know if you saw, but Ron Johnson this morning, one of the more disgusting things I've seen come out of a U.S. senator, said that the reason John McCain voted the way he did on health care might have been because of his brain tumor.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so I've twice now tweeted out for him to apologize. This is absolutely ridiculous. But, they're so good at making sure their base comes out no matter what. But they do all sorts of things to make it so we don't get voters out, and then they can kind of tweak the elections. They either do it through votes or through gerrymandering by, picking who your voters are as opposed to the voters picking their elected officials. We just have to push back on those efforts wherever we see them so that they can't do those things. So I'm just hoping that we keep this activism up. We have to keep engaging people. We have to have record turnouts in 2018. And with record turnouts, you're going to be able to change a lot of faces of those who are in Congress and make them represent you, as well as our state legislatures and our municipal governments. We just have to keep as vigilant as possible. We're seeing this really damaging effect of what's happening, and we've got to stop it really quickly.
Chris in Littleton, Colorado. You're on with Congressman Pocan.
Representative, it looks like here in Colorado, Ed Perlmutter, I guess isn't going to be running for the House, but I really hope that he runs for Senate. But, I mean, if he leaves the state, that's going to be a huge loss for us down here.
Yeah, Ed's a great colleague, and I know he was thinking about governor, and now he's decided not to do that. I'm not sure if we've got 100% definitive if he's not running for re-election again as a member of Congress. I know at one point he said he wasn't, but I know a lot of members have talked to him about it. But, we're going to be focusing, though, on the districts, too, that we've got to pick up around the country. And, we know that I think there's 23 districts that Hillary Clinton won that have Republicans. We know there's a number of other swing districts out there, and we saw the big shifts in the special elections this year in deep red districts that narrowed down to barely red districts. If you start having that kind of a swing in districts that are 5% Republican or 7% Republican, that's obliterated that amount. So I think the last I heard is something like 208 districts that have Republicans already have an announced Democrat running, and about 10% of that is what Republicans have running against Democrats. There is an enthusiasm out there. We're going to have a lot of primaries. I think we have to be careful not to, how we treat each other through those primaries, but we have got some real opportunities to make sure that we're taking back the House of Representatives in 2018.
Caesar in Chicago. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having such informative program. My question has to deal, especially here in Chicago, one of the facts that I always see and read is things that really worry me right now is the Foxconn deal, for example. It reminds me, I'm from Guatemala, so it reminds me a lot of the deals that happen in countries like Guatemala. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, especially with the land grants, the tax breaks that you're giving them? What that's going to mean politically, socially, and economically for the state, not only your state, but also here in Illinois.
Yeah, and Caesar, let me even take it a little broader. I mean, we see these around the country when people do these incentives. It's the low road economics, right? Not the high road. We'll offer incentives for someone to come across a state line to steal from another state or something, and you wind up offering so much of an incentive that you'll never get the tax return. There was one on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota where a Dairy Queen got about $250,000 in incentives, and they created 2 part-time jobs out of it. That's not a good deal for taxpayers. So with Foxconn, I think a couple things are important to mention. One is I think a lot of what they're doing is looking at if President Trump really is going to do the tariffs he's talking about, which I don't think will ever become a reality because the Republicans in Congress won't ever allow that. They're trying to be ready to make sure that they've got a presence here if they need to. Now, they've told Pennsylvania to build a plant. They never did. They told Indonesia they're going to build a plant. They never did. And I think there's a third one somewhere that they promised and never done. So first of all, you've got to be careful how you give incentives to something that may never happen. Second, I keep hearing the company saying it's going to be 3,000 jobs. Scott Walker, who's desperate for re-election in 2018, keeps saying 13,000
Well, isn't
jobs.
he including the construction jobs to build the factory?
That's separate. What he's doing is they said aspirationally they'd like to have 13,000. Tom, in your business, aspirationally, you'd love to have a staff of 100, right?
Oh, yeah. And someday we may. Who knows?
Right. But, maybe not in the next year or two. And here Foxconn, so what he's doing is saying that $13,000 number with the $3 billion of incentives to try to lower the per job number. And then they're claiming it's going to be $54,000, $55,000 a year job wages for those jobs. But right now they're paying a little over $17 a day in Asia. Again, a lot doesn't pass the upper Midwest smell test. So I want to make sure as I talk to my friends in the legislature, and I have extensively in the last 2 weeks, that any incentives, if they're going to be offered, they should be tied to the actual number of jobs, the pay of jobs as they're looking forward. Because otherwise, you start doing this, I think it's like 40-some years before we get our money back in offering this kind of an incentive. And, companies, of course, are going to go around and fish and play state to state to state to do this kind of stuff. This is the low road economics. It's a good thing if you have 13,000 new jobs, but I'm not sure there are going to be that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this.